So when did you actively start initiating some planning for an International Day of Peace?
That began when I was a student in Washington, D.C. in 1961 when I met Valentine Gamow. And I saw these circles as an opportunity to begin to seed this idea. So after we had had enough of the meetings on a monthly basis, I began to work, because each of them came from a different country. And I said, what would you think if we all worked together with your particular ministries and with your nations, that we might create a Universal Day of Peace that could be adopted by a UN resolution? So that began in 1961. And 20 years later, a resolution was passed. But once I moved to San Francisco, where I'd never lived before, that was in 1975, and began that process right away. And I became connected at that time with someone who was probably one of my dearest longtime colleagues, Robert Muller, known as Robert Muller, who was Assistant Secretary General of the UN and was with the United Nations for 40 years. Once we had built up that deep rapport by correspondence, I rang them up and said, I have something very important that I've been carrying with me for a very long time, and I need to ask for your assistance and to see what you think of this idea. And so he began working his magic. And so Costa Rica was a wonderful candidate, and Oscar Arias had wanted to do something that showed his country's commitment to peace, because they had abolished any kind of military in Costa Rica. So that seemed a very likely possibility. So that was one of the nations, and that actually ended up being the nation that was the primary sponsor of the resolution. Like Oscar Arias said, I've had an idea like this as well. Ambassador John McDonnell said, gosh, this is a great idea. I've had a similar idea. That's what I love about it. That it doesn't belong to any one human being. It's because it happens simultaneously. The people have been carrying a similar idea for a long time or a short time, or they hear it and they say, that's it.
Right.
I know I'm supposed to be part of it. And that's when you know that something is meant to happen and it's working, because there's no one person involved. Absolutely no one you can point to and say, this is the person that did it. That when any idea actually comes into manifestation and really is a short and long-term service to this planet within humanity, it has to be a group endeavor. It has to be cooperative, it has to be collaborative, and it has to eventually occur to more than one person at one time. And that is important, because that's how you know that there's integrity in it and it has an impeccability about it. I was just one of many, one of many. And I want to particularly give honor to the extraordinary activity of the group endeavor and the courage, actually, because this was the first unanimous resolution that had to do with peace that involved every single nation of the United Nations. There had not been that level of accord, and this was historic. What it took was a lot of people within the UN and also members of civil society, like Ambassador John McDonnell and others, to meet with ambassadors from the different embassies and missions, and to help to give the rationale for it, and to find which countries would be delighted to support it, so that there could be at least building up a majority. So it took a while to do that.
More than a year?
Oh, it takes more than a year, yes. And so the momentum finally building once the General Assembly met in session in 1981, enough preparation had been done, but then the final resolution had to be agreed upon, and every word had to be agreed upon, and the date and the title had to be agreed upon of that, and that was quite a process. So what happened was that it changed from the original idea of World Peace Day to International Day of Peace, because it was the United Nations, and it was again during the Cold War still. Mm-hmm. So by using International Day of Peace, it helped bring it back to the nations, and in a way help hold nations responsible for this, and hopefully make this something that would be implemented by all nations. It was decided to not have September 21st a fixed date at that time, because it would make it more difficult to have it passed. But if it could be with the opening of the UN General Assembly, which is always a varying date, it was always around the third Tuesday in September, that was this opening date.
Well, it made it easier for the heads of state, more difficult for the general people.
Yes, exactly right. And so we said, well, we'll get to that again later, because most important is that it get passed and that it be something that nations all agree to, because this was historic, that all nations, even at war with each other, would agree to a universal day of peace.
Give peace a voice, let our hearts be heard, sounding our choice to love and preserve. There's a light in us all, a polished pearl. Give peace a voice, uniting nations of the world.